Greetings, everybody. I'm very delighted to have on my show today Dominic Frisby, who to many of you will need no introduction. I'm very glad that he's come on because we were just talking before we came on air that our paths hadn't personally crossed before, but they should have done because we are definitely simpatico. And I have been bemoaning the lack of political satire, which really started in a great number, I would argue, with Gilray and people like that in the 1700s, fairly vicious political satire. And so it has gone on. And as a child of the 60s, perhaps, that was the week that was, which only older viewers will remember, probably. But I believe political satire is probably the strongest medicine that bad government can have. One thing politicians can't stand, and that is being laughed at. They can cope with criticism, accusations of all sorts, but they can't bear to be laughed at because they're too far up their own bottoms. So without further ado, I'm going to let Dominic take over, and we're going to talk about children, whose responsibility they are, the educational system, and this rather unpleasant bill that's coming through, which is mislabeled as the Child Protection Bill, or whatever they want to call it, childhood well-being, which of course we know with this government, it means it will have nothing to do with childhood well-being. So we're going to kick it around, and I'm going to hand over to Dominic, who's got some very good anecdotes to tell us and lots of views, and I'm looking forward to this exchange. So Dominic, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Godfrey, and it's a pleasure to meet you after all these years. I can remember back in the late noughties as a gold bug, beholding your speech to the European Union and sharing it with lots of friends and having it shared with me many times. And it was wonderful to know that at least there was one politician out there who got it and got sound money and got gold and all of that. And I'm sorry it's taken us so long to meet, but that was a wonderful speech. And you know, my partner is a big believer in even if nobody listens, uttering the words. It's important you utter the words in, whatever cauldron you're in. And the fact that you went and spoke those words in the EU Parliament was a very important act in and of itself.
Thank you. Thank you very much for those kind words.
And and you talked about political satire. Political satire isn't dead. Unfortunately, it's got no outlet in mainstream TV because mainstream TV is controlled by by the left, and they just won't give voice to anyone else. I actually did a study of Radio 4 comedians, and I put them all on the political compass where they were, and there were two who were right of centre against maybe 48 or 50 who were left of centre, and in most cases extreme left of centre. And the BBC is just owned by the left, and it won't give an outlet to any other voice. And so if you want satire, you've got to look elsewhere for it. Unfortunately, we have memes and comic songs and Twitter and nasty remarks and all the rest of it. And so political satire is alive and well on the internet, but it doesn't have an outlet in mainstream TV or radio. You said that political satire began in the 17th century. I've no doubt that was a wonderful time for it, but I think you'll probably find that it goes all the way back to ancient Greece, and Aristophanes and Lord knows who else was probably, satirizing whoever was king at the time. I think political satire has probably been around as long as politics has. And you're absolutely right. It's a strong weapon because politicians have big egos, and egos do not like being undermined.
Absolutely right. Yes, of course, as ancient Greece was some of the greatest philosophers of all time. Still, their words still ring true today. So, yeah, absolutely. Tell us, this bill, we'll get onto it in a minute, but this bill that's going through, which is now with the House of Lords, has some very nasty bits in it. And I'm going to give a link to the black belt barrister who picked up on this a week or so ago from a technical legal perspective. So, we don't need to dig too deep down in that because his clip actually does talk about that. But the implications of that are really quite frightening. What's your view?
Well, I'm afraid, Godfrey, I haven't looked at the bill. I didn't even know until we began this conversation that any such bill was going through. But So I can't comment with any insight whatsoever. But the fact that a bill is going through, it just, to me, it just, without knowing anything about it, to me, it probably smells of another layer of bureaucracy and another layer of it means more state rather than less state, and we need less state.
Absolutely right. And I think we can cover that. We can cover that by links. We'll put the links on all the links. So we need your link and the Black Barristers link. So people who are growing in their interest in this particular situation where they're unhappy about what's being taught in schools. They're unhappy about what's being taught in schools. There's fake science being taught in schools. There's fake economics, and of course, there's mishistory, if it's such a word, of mishistory, especially our own British history, which is very concerning to people, which is why homeschooling is beginning to grow in popularity, and which is why, of course, no authoritarian or totalitarian administration can possibly allow your children to be taught in anything other by state-approved schools. So, that's one of the problems that we have.
Yeah. Homeschooling, a real catalyst for homeschooling was the COVID pandemic, because a lot of families realized they can actually teach their kids at home. And then they realized they were being taught nonsense at school. And so that really kicked things off, especially in the US. That's where it really saw growth, less so in the UK. And unfortunately, the UK powers that be are incapable of trusting the US citizen of leaving him alone and just letting him or her do what they think is right. They have to get involved. And normally it's through the tentacles of bureaucracy. But I wrote a book I can't even remember when I wrote it, 2011, 2012, called Life After the State. And I basically made the broader case that in every area of our lives where the state gets involved, they make it worse. And the core argument of the book was that we need to separate money and state, which is obviously a big theme of yours and a big theme of Bitcoiners and gold bugs, any kind of sound money advocate. And, but, healthcare would be much better if there was no state involvement. It would cost a lot less and the level of service would be better. Education, just money, every area of our lives would work better with less state. So it was basically an anarchist or a minarchist didactic. But I had a long chapter about education, and it's quite interesting because the state didn't get involved in education until the 19th century. Late 19th century, it made education compulsory. The Forster Act, it began with 1870. But what actually had happened is by the point at which education became compulsory, something like 96% of the population was already literate. In fact, literacy levels in the late 19th century compare with literacy levels today. There's been all sorts of findings where, it's been found that teenage children can't read. It's just not uncommon. And you just think, how is that possible in this age of the internet and phones and everything else for a child to be illiterate? But it happens. But in any case, the conclusions of what happened with education is that as people moved from the countryside into the cities during the Industrial Revolution, and probably for many people for the first time in history, they were earning more than they needed to cover their basic board and lodging. The first thing people spent money on after food, clothing, accommodation was self-improvement. And so what happened is that people became, we saw the emergence of a new middle class and a new literate middle class. And it all happened quite organically. Didn't need state involvement. There was only that last 3 or 4%, 5% maybe, who stayed illiterate. And the state felt they needed to get involved to get that last 5% literate. Well, it hasn't worked. All they've done is ruined education for everyone else. And in fact, we see it now in closing down all the public schools with VAT, attacking them through VAT. Loads of public schools have closed down. What they've done is increased the expense to the state of educating people, because more people are going to state schools now, while diminishing the quality of education that they receive. So it's just an absolutely dumb measure. And the net gain from the extra VAT that they charge is more than written off by the cost of educating all these extra pupils and all these schools going bust. But the point of the 19th century is that people spend money on self-improvement, and left alone, they will improve and educate by themselves. And I think testament to this is the fact that when you look at which are the most watched videos on YouTube, they are all education of some form or other. Even if it's, how to fix my boiler, from how to get more fit, from how to improve my memory. It's self-improvement, self-education is by far the most watched category. And that is because we have an inherent human desire to learn. And when education is compulsory, you raise all sorts of moral issues. Who sets the agenda? Who sets the curriculum? What is their agenda? Why are you teaching this? Why are you teaching this? And so education, when it's supplied by the state, inevitably becomes politicized. And most of our institutions are controlled by that sort of left of centre worldview. And so it is politicized, that self-hating English thing. It's politicized in that direction. And so we're mistaught everything in order that that agenda is fulfilled. That is more important than actual learning. But there are just so many inflexibilities. Like, it is a human instinct to want to learn, but you have to be interested in the subject to want to learn about it. And the way so many subjects are taught, it doesn't make you interested in that subject. In fact, because so many subjects are not taught practically, but they're taught theoretically in the classroom. So, for example, maths is taught theoretically in a classroom. If you go to the market and you have to do basic sums as you hand your money over to buy this and that, you learn addition and subtraction pretty quickly. And similarly with all the sciences, when you are actually, if you're taught biology theoretically in a classroom, it's one thing. But if you actually go out on a biology field trip and you're going to the local pond and getting all the animals from the pond and doing all of this, it's a completely different experience. And the same goes for chemistry and physics. How many kids just drop out of chemistry and physics as they're bored rigid by it, when these are actually fascinating and vitally important subjects? They're just taught wrong because they're taught theoretically rather than practically. And everyone will go, yeah, well, we have physics labs and we have chemistry labs. It's not the same as in the real world. And there are all sorts of studies that have shown that even if you home educate your kids and you don't actually formally teach them, so they have no formal lessons at all, they still attain very basic levels of learning that are equal to those that they attain in schools with no formal education whatsoever. So I find that pretty incredible. Now, I'll let you talk for a bit, Godfrey, because I've whistled on. But what I do want to do is tell you the story of my son and what happened with him. But we can do that, at the next stage of the interview.
Well, yeah, you're here to witter on. People want to listen to you, not me. But I just pick up on a couple of things that you said because I think are extremely important. Many, many years ago, I was in the army, a very young officer, but we were part of teaching soldiers, various things, whether it's map reading or whatever it happened to be. And I remember being the teaching course, how do we go about this? There was a warrant officer actually taking the class of young officers on how to give lectures to soldiers. And I learned this very well from him because he just backs up what you said. He said, you will not teach soldiers anything unless you can motivate them to learn. They'll stare out of the window. You have to motivate them. And it doesn't matter how you motivate them. You can say, if you pass a course, or if you pass this course, or if you pass this class, you will be eligible for promotion to corporal, which is another step towards a sergeant's mess, which means more money and a better way of life for you in the army. So your motivation. And of course, I was staring out of the window. I went to a fairly plausible sort of school, but I was staring out of the window in double maths and double Latin because I could not see at all what it had to do with me. But what was interesting when I left school, I realized things like trigonometry, which I couldn't possibly see the point in, was if you take a bearing on somebody shooting at you from that bearing and somebody shooting at you from that bearing, you can actually work out with trigonometry exactly where the bugger is to shoot back. Now, if somebody had told me that when I was 16, I would have taken an interest. But of course they didn't. So motivation, absolutely right. And of course, the misuse of state education which is now why we are in the mess that we are in when it comes to particularly science subjects, which are net zero is a natural result of, which is actually putting ordinary working folk out of work. Misscience, wrong science, fake science is actually putting people out of work. And I think the state education system, it doesn't cover that. It doesn't cover things right. The things I learned in school are not being taught now, and they were fundamental principles of science. But
Yeah, I mean, if you asked an English kid today, a school kid today, to name the kings of England, I think most of them would struggle. And my daughter, I've got four kids, but my elder daughter has actually been messed up by what she was told. She's so confused, for example, about slavery. She had no idea about, for example, the Barbary slave trade. You know, that white people were stolen from the coasts of Cornwall and Devon and so on and stolen into slavery. She had no idea. Millions of people taken. And she confuses, you know, this is what tends to happen with the United States. It exports its culture the same way it exports everything else. It exports its narratives. And so whatever happened in America in the 19th century is apparently what happened here in England when we'd already made slavery illegal decades earlier. You know, we were the first nation in history to put an end to the slave trade. It was a remarkable thing that we did. And you'd think we were the biggest perpetrators in history from what you're taught. And, you know, you're just taught stuff that is wrong. And it leads to this confusion and this self-loathing and all sorts of terrible things. And like, fortunately, my youngest son is very, very sporty and hasn't listened to a word he was taught at school anyway, so he's sort of stayed fairly immune to it. My other daughter's a genius, but you know, she's gradually unlearning all the stuff that she was taught. But then the next daughter has been messed up by it. And my eldest boy, fortunately, you know, listens to a lot of podcasts and has self-educated himself that way, and has fortunately had, you know, a lot of the nonsense he was taught at school, he's unlearnt it, thank God. But, you know, it's ridiculous that you should go to school and then unlearn everything. I mean, what's the point of school if you have to then unlearn it?
Well, when I eventually got to the rank of director of an international investment bank in the city years ago, I would not employ anybody who'd read economics at university because they would all be Keynesian. And I couldn't untrain them. There wasn't time. It's a commercial environment. I don't have time. I didn't have time to untrain people with which they now call modern monetary theory, which encapsulated means debt doesn't matter. Debt bloody well matters. It doesn't matter who the hell you are. But you're trying to tell some youngsters these days, or even when I was there, you'd be better off taking a classicist or something of that nature, and then you can say this is how it works. You know, come onto the team and bring your clever attitude and your brain and all that to the party. But you've got to forget what you learned at Oxford, Cambridge, or Durham because it's bollocks.
It really is. And I don't know where you stand on Bitcoin, but one of the things I like about it is that it has educated the younger generation about sound money. And it has been one of the most incredible educative tools. People have got involved in it because they thought they were going to get rich and for speculative purposes. A bit like I got involved with gold in the noughties. I thought, you know, gold was going to $5,000 back then, and I was going to, you know, blah, blah, blah. But people have got involved with Bitcoin because, you know, for speculative reasons, because they want to get rich. And then in the course of getting involved in Bitcoin, they've learnt about the evils of fiat money. They've learnt about debt. They've learnt about, if you measure stock markets in, for example, in gold, somebody sent me a chart today of the stock markets measured in gold. They haven't gone anywhere for years. Yeah. So what's been, and all stock markets now is just a vehicle for storing your wealth that doesn't get debased to quite the same extent that it does if you store it in fiat currency. But Bitcoin has been wonderful because it's educated loads of people about the nature of money and what a total fraud it is in a way but the reason they've got educated is because they were motivated to get rich. Do you see what it is? So it's we're back to that motivation thing.
Fear and greed and love. Yeah. Fear, greed, and love. Fear is the most important. An American told me once, this might amuse you, Dominic. He told me the story of if you kick a man's door in, you know, when he's asleep at 2 o'clock in the morning, you throw a bag of gold on the floor, see how quickly he gets out of bed. He gets out of bed for it pretty quickly. but not as quickly if you kicked open the door and fired one round into the ceiling and threatened to fire that. He gets out of bed even quicker because fear is a stronger motivation than greed. So it's all these and it's different with different people, but certainly greed is a healthy thing. You know, if you're greedy for your family and you're not treading on anybody else's throat, you know, it's a perfectly healthy phenomenon.
Well, I've just written a book, The Secret History of Gold. You can see it over my shoulder there, the cover. And I've looked at all the things that, you know, gold is pure wealth. There's no purer form of wealth. And it has motivated people to do the most incredible things. You know, we would not have the west coast of the United States were it not for gold. Australia, South Africa, South America. It's just motivated people to go out, explore, to take risks, to innovate, to do the most daring and incredible things. It's also motivated people to do the most terrible things. There's a great story that Ruskin used to tell, which I put in the book, of a man who went to sea going somewhere else, and he took all his wealth with him in 3 bags of gold. And then the ship went under. And everyone's like, you know, ship going down, jump overboard, whatever they cry. And so he tied his gold to his waist and jumped overboard and sunk to the bottom of the sea because he had his gold on him. And Ruskin said, had he the gold or had the gold him?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
But in any case, let me tell you the story of my son, my eldest son. And he's 24 now. And when he was 15 or 16, he did his GCSEs, and he went to a school called St Dunstan's in southeast London, which
my old father's school. He was an old Dunstonian as well. Many years
how funny, because it was a military school, of course. Yeah. And well, I hope I don't upset your dad when I say that St Dunstan's today, I used to call it a hotbed of mediocrity. And basically, if you didn't get into Dulwich or Allaines, you went to St Dunstan's. And but it was a nice enough school. But so my eldest boy, he was always quite good at maths. And I always thought maths was a useful subject. And he just had a natural inclination for it. And he always enjoyed, you know, working things out. You could see, and he was quick to do sums and so on. So I encouraged him to do maths A-level. And I think maths is a useful subject. And he started doing maths A-level. And at the A-level level, the school brought in loads of kids from Korea and China. And they put them in the classes. Now, the kids from Korea and China, mathematically, are just so much more advanced than we are. They've been hot-housed. I understand that the system of the way maths is taught there means that kids are just better at maths anyway. But anyway, and so Samuel was put in the top set. And he used to come back from school, and he would go, oh, these kids, they're just so fast at it. It's really hard to keep up. And the problem, and you know, some of them are correcting the teachers. And the problem was these kids had already done the course before they got there, whereas Samuel was learning it for the first time. So immediately he was at a huge disadvantage. And, you know, we came to 3 or 4 months later, November, whenever it was, the parents' meeting. And I got this sort of telling off from the teacher saying how disorganized my son was and how lazy he was and blah, blah, blah. Anyway, he goes through the year and he does his end of year exam and he gets a D. And the school says to him, he can resit in August, but he has to get a C if he's to continue with the course. Otherwise, he can't continue with the course. And or he has to resit another year. And I just thought, I'm not making him sit a whole through another year at school. So I went on this website called Tutor Hunt, where you find tutors. And I just literally got the best reviewed guy close to me. Like the same way you might choose a hotel on booking.com or somebody, the guy who's got the best reviews. And I don't know what I was expecting, but this kid turned up who was maybe 2 or 3 years older than my son. He was 19 or 20. And he was in his final year at King's University, again, just up the road. Either he was in his final year. Yeah, he was in his final year. No, he'd just finished. That's right. He'd just finished at King's and he was going to do a PhD at Cambridge the following year. No, I tell a lie. He was in his final year. Anyway, it doesn't matter. And he does does some basic lessons with my son, and he's really together. This kid, he's really good looking. He presents himself really well. He goes to the gym, looks after himself, really motivated, wants to make something of his life. He's just a really together young kid. And we did a couple of lessons, and he just went, yeah, he's really good at maths. He'll get an A. And I was like, well, the school said he'll get a D. And he said, no, he'll be fine. And so Samuel then, over the course of the summer, with this tutor, did some work. And, I watched him, and he worked really hard. And the tutor was really encouraging, and I could just see progress. And then he went to do this resit in the school in August. And he went and sat the exam, and he got an E. So even though he'd worked really hard, he'd gone from a D to an E. And Samuel said this when he got the end of year paper. He'd gone to me. There are too many marks. There were too many questions in the paper. I couldn't finish it. And I was like, yeah. And then come August, he goes again. Yeah, there were too many questions in the paper. Too many marks in the paper. And I was like, no, I just dismissed it. Then, just as a casual note, I'm going to get these numbers slightly wrong, but I just said to Lewis, his teacher, how many marks should there be in a paper? And I think he said something like 95. And I said to Samuel, how many marks were there in your paper? And Samuel said there was 125. So it was like a third too many questions. So anyway, then I have this inevitable conversation with his maths teacher who phones me up. He goes, well, he's got an E. He's going to either have to resit the year or he's going to have to drop maths. And I said, well, how many questions were there they're supposed to be in a paper? And the teacher goes, 95. And I said, how many questions were there in the paper? Because Samuel said there was 126. And there's a pause on the end of the phone. And then the teacher goes, I'll call you back. 2 days later, the teacher calls me back. Yeah, I'm terribly sorry. There's been a mistake. And we're upgrading your son to a B. And he doesn't need to resit the year. So they'd asked too many questions in the paper, and they'd done it in last June, and then they'd done it in August. And if I hadn't had this extra tutor come in, we would never have known. And all the kids in that school who would have had to resit the year or lose maths altogether were vindicated. So we're now 2 days from the beginning of term, and Samuel's like, please don't make me go back to that school. So I was like, okay, I won't. We'll find you another school. So I'd had a big row with the headmaster at this stage, who I have to say behaved very well about the whole thing. He's a good headmaster. And so they let me take him out of the school without charging me a term's rent, which I was quite relieved about. And I saw that this kid, Lewis, was making real progress with his maths. So I went back while we were looking for another school, I went back on Tutor Hunt, and I found him another teacher for geography, and I found him another teacher for economics, which were his 3 A levels. And I forget what they charged, but I think it was like 20, 25 quid an hour, something like that. And, they were at the bottom end, and I knew in his school at A-level stage, I think you only do like 5 or 6 hours for each subject. I'm going to get these numbers slightly wrong because it's so long ago in my memory. So I thought, I'll get each teacher for the same amount of time as they would have for school. And these kids all turned out, they were all students at King's University looking to supplement their student income by tutoring other kids. And the geography teacher was a army guy. He was just great. He was sponsored by the army. He was going into the army. Alex, the economics teacher, I absolutely adored. And it was left wing, the economics teacher, but he was very, very bright. And so he had a left wing worldview, but he was clever enough to see the right wing perspective and understand the right wing perspective and be able to explain it and argue with it. But he had arrived at the conclusion. I think, actually, no, he was pretty right wing because he was involved in the Conservative Party for his student union. Anyway, so Samuel starts studying, and after about 3 or 4 weeks, I'm watching what's going on. And I'm like, he's learning more here than he would learn in a school. And it's costing me less money. And, it was funny. He was having his lessons in Wetherspoons. He was meeting his geography teacher in Wetherspoons, and they would go and order a cup of coffee, and he'd have his geography lessons in Wetherspoons. And then he'd go and meet his economics teacher at King's, and he'd have his lessons in King's. And so he was seeing all the students 2 or 3 years older than him, and feeling like a really grown up boy because he was hanging out with the students. This is when he was 16, 17. And he came to really like it. And I watched him and he worked really hard. And so we just stuck with it. And so then we had to find an exam centre for him to have his exams in. And we found this exam centre up the road in New Cross Gate, which was a little bit end of the world. It was like, but anyway, he did it and he ended up doing his exams in there. And we worked really hard and he applied to go to Bristol University to do economics. And I remember I was doing the Edinburgh Festival in August and I was staying at Merrin Somerset Webb's house. She puts me up at her house when I do the festival. And I just got this message from one morning in August going, Bristol University is pleased to accept your son's university application. And he needed A-star AA to get into Bristol University. So it meant he'd got A-star AA. So I then, at this point, I was weeping. I was so happy after this journey we'd been through over the last year. And then, of course, we found out that he actually got ABB. He didn't get A-star AA, but it was enough to get him into Bristol University. And that's the only reason you do your A-levels anyway, because once you've gone to university, nobody cares what A-levels you've got. And so he got into Bristol University to do economics, very respectable university, very respectable subject. And he ended up getting a 2-1 at Bristol. And that would not have happened if he'd stayed in his school. He just wouldn't have got into Bristol. And he was at that stage when he was 16. He was just starting to smoke weed and do the things that you shouldn't do when you're 16. And he could have quite easily just become one of those, bum around weed heads that a lot of boys turn out to be. But fortunately, I was just able to steer him onto this course at just the right time. But it was a lesson to me because of course tutoring took off massively during COVID. This was before COVID, and I think the prices of tutors have generally gone up as a result of all of that. But it was a lesson to me that you can achieve a much higher standard of learning for a much lower cost. And there's no reason why, a group of 3 or 4 mums can't get together and find a tutor and have a mini school with 4 or 5 kids and just take turns and do it in each other's kitchen and so on. That's what communities are for. And that's kind of how education used to be. And then gradually schools came up, or the church was responsible for educating the children, was a big educator. But in any case, it proved to me that we don't need schools. And this was a public school. It wasn't even a state school. And I have to say, my eldest daughter then went to states. She left St Dunstan's at O level and went to the local state school. And that was even worse. And so eventually we got her out. Now, a lot of people don't have the luxury that I've got money and so I was able to pay for tutoring and so on. But if you're frugal and you're clever about it, it can be done. And really, I actually think that the state, if you decide not to send your children to state school and you have paid taxes, you should get a rebate on the taxes you have spent so that you can spend it on other forms of education. That, of course, will never happen in a month of Sundays, but there's a strong argument for it. Anyway, that's my story, and it was very. I've argued for keeping the state out of education in life after the state, but when it actually came to doing it, I proved that in practice it can be done.
Absolutely, and I've been it's a trumpet I've been blowing for some time because. I was having trouble with maths when I got to O level, and you know what it was like in the old days in the 1960s. If you didn't have maths, you needed maths and English and another 3 before you could start your professional exams. And I was struggling because I was in quite a big class, staring out of the window, didn't understand what quadratic equations and all that. It frightened the death of the whole subject. And I was sorted out with a one-on-one in the same way my father found somebody who was at Dulwich College, a very young schoolmaster, maths teacher, who wanted to sort of just thicken up his wage packet a bit. So I got him. And I just had a number of evenings with him, an hour or so per evening, to get my O-level results up in October because I was having a resit. And I sat there with this young man and I was thinking, how could it be I didn't understand this? This isn't difficult. Yeah. He was making it easy for me. And the guys at school, the masters at school, were making it complicated. And I was losing the will to live. So I've been advocating this for some time. Yeah, I mean, you can have a dining room. You can have a dining with some chairs around it, and you split the cost of a tutor coming in. Yes, it's more expensive, but that doesn't matter. It's still pennies compared with public school education these days. It's pennies, and you can get them through the main subjects. And this is really quite exciting. It's an exciting opportunity. Homeschooling is an exciting opportunity. Too many people think that I can't teach my son French. I can't teach my. Nobody's asking you to do it. You just get somebody who can do it at home.
Yeah.
It isn't difficult, which is why, of course, the state cannot allow the ideological case for you staying, because at staying at home, you might be taught a positive view of British history. You might be taught a positive view about other matters of life and economics, which isn't Keynesian, and they can't afford you to do that. Or science, which doesn't involve nonsense science. They have to make sure, and that's why they're making it so difficult for people now to continue. And I've been involved a little bit on the fringe of this because I was in office with constituents for several years. And up until just a year or so ago, it was actually relatively easy to actually do that for a switched on parent who knows what she's doing, or parents or group of parents. They are now actively making it really, really difficult. Your state representative is entitled to come into your home. They're entitled to do this and do that and do that. And of course, this is just for people who have an interest in this, and I'll just wrap it up very quickly. The new bill gives the school the opportunity to take all the details of the child that they need, including medical information, psychological, everything that they can do. They don't have to share it with the parent, but it's also subcontracted to other actors. So people can get onto a computer and find out all about your child, or your child's problems, or your family problems, without the protection. This is interesting, the Data Protection Act. The Data Protection Act is written out in law, and it's with the Lords at the moment. So that's something. They can't afford you to sit at home and do the obvious thing, was get somebody who knows what they're doing to teach the kids. And the kids can then go out to the sunshine in the afternoon and kick a ball about.
Well, exactly. And I mean, you will get a better education. Even if you can't teach French or whatever the subject is, get a book and learn it with your child. It's quite easy to do. I've always been okay at languages, but I never was that good at French. And my eldest daughter, I got a French book. I started teaching my eldest daughter French, and I suddenly realised, oh, this is how it works. It's just once you get the verbs, you'll be fine. All you need to do with French is get the verbs, and you'll be fine. It's just got a ridiculous system of verbs, and I wouldn't say I had the secret of French, but I suddenly realised that it's not that difficult. And again, languages are another example. When you're taught languages in a classroom, you're like, why am I learning this? But if you go to France or go to wherever the country is of the language you're learning, and you're thrust into that place, and you actually need to speak the language in order to get on with your day, it's a very different reality at all. And one of the most fun things you can do is speak a foreign language. I say this as someone who speaks several languages. I speak Italian best of all, and it just gives me joy to speak in Italian. And the way languages are taught in schools, we're depriving children of this essential joy. It's just awful. And if I want to teach my kids what I think is the right worldview, it is none of your business what I teach them. Even if I teach them that, somebody heinous is good, it is still none of your business. And the state, when it comes to education, genuinely thinks it knows better than you, and it does not.
Well, fascinating. I went into politics for 10 years for the Brexit thing, of course, as everybody knows. Or certainly everybody knows watching this channel. And I'd come from an investment bank, a top investment bank in the city. And I was sitting in committees, financial service committees, economic and monetary affairs committees, and so on and so forth. I could not believe the low standard of the people around me from Western Europe. With the exception of the Poles, which are Central Europe, if you will. But I mean, the standard of British MEP was appalling. And so you have a whole raft of people who simply can't cope with information, can't assess information, can't read statistics. It came to me once, when I was, frankly, I was in Arizona, going back a few years. I was in Arizona, and there were some kids in a sort of shelter from the sun, not from the rain, and we were waiting for a sort of pick up, my wife and I won't bore you with the details. But there were some very lovely kids. There've been about 11 or 12 American kids sitting on a bench under the sun shelter. And they came over and offered us the shelter to get out of the sun. And they were so articulate, looked you in the eye. They were such marvelously articulate children. And their mum came to pick them up in about 5 minutes, I think. And they'd been homeschooled. They were totally and utterly relaxed in adult company. They were light years ahead of your average state school 12 or 13 or 14-year-old, who all they can do is grunt. They grunt.
Well, I know when I look at the way school kids behave, around me, but whenever you travel, you tend to run into lots of school kids. It just makes you despair. You think, what is the future going to be if this lot are running the place?
Exactly. Well, we both know it couldn't be worse.
Well, yeah, I'm afraid so.
Well, look, that's been most fascinating. And I really enjoyed talking to you, Dominic, about that. I think that's going to really help some of my people who are a little bit on the edge, thinking, well, where do I start? That's a lovely insight into how you can actually deal with it, because most people want to know, it's all very well, but what do I do? I'm a frustrated parent with a 15-year-old. What can I do? And I think you've just lit the path for them on that experience.
Well, I hope so. And I would just urge as many people as possible to follow the path that I have taken. And the other thing that it does, it forged such a good relationship between me and my eldest boy. That's the other effect it will have. And he trusts me and I trust him, and it's benefited our relationship. I can't even quantify how much. So I would urge everyone to just, and it just wasn't possible. And when the kids were young, it just was, in the circumstances of my life at the time, it wasn't possible to do it. But for me, school, and the problem is the public schools have been co-opted as well, and they're just they have to meet the regulators' requirements, and so they're teaching the same bullshit. But they're better, but they're still not good. But yeah, I would just, it's not for me to say because it's your life and it's your kids, but my general advice would be keep them out of school for as long as you possibly can. Don't put them in. Because once they're in the system, it's very hard to get them out. So stay out of it for as long as you can. If some regulator comes knocking at your door, tell them to fuck off. Excuse my language, but that's exactly where they should go, and mind their own business. And every time you see like a genius kid, 12-year maths prodigy, gets into Oxford, every few years there's that same story comes about. They are always home educated, always, and it's because the kid will be what happens in schools is they use the clever kids, they sit them next to the thick kids to try and pull the thick kids up. So your kid becomes a tool. And rather than and everyone just gets dragged into the same mediocrity in the middle. Whereas if your kid's got a talent at something, who cares if for 3 years he only studies maths and ends up not studying something else for 2 or 3 years? You can learn O-level chemistry or O-level this. You can learn that in less than a year easily. You don't need 10 years to learn to get to O-level French or O-level chemistry. You just don't. GCSE, I should say. And so if your kid goes up a rabbit hole. And, you look at all Bill Gates and Steve Jobs, they all dropped out the system because, and maybe we shouldn't all be aspiring to be Bill Gates, but he has, as a human being, he has achieved incredible amounts. And it's because he dropped out. You will achieve more by dropping out and don't get sucked in the first place.
Just before we sign off, Dominic, you've got the Secret History of Gold, which is the placard which I commend everybody to. You can't learn too much about gold because gold can save you and your family for what's coming down the track. What was the other book you talked about?
Well, my first book was called Life After the State. And that's got the chapter about education in it. And, a lot of people Matt Ridley calls back to that book in his work a lot. And, respected author, Matt Ridley, of course. And so I'm very proud of that one. And people see it as a sort of a very good intro to libertarianism, if you like. But Secret History of Gold's just come out, and I'm very proud of it. I think probably my best book is Daylight Robbery, which is all about the history of taxation. And but yeah, you can read any of my books. Join my Substack, theflyingfrisbee.com. And if you want to be entertained, come and watch me live. Come and watch me do a gig, and laugh your socks off, and be reminded that there is still hope.
Thanks again, Dominic. Well, there we've had it from the horse's mouth, and the links are there. Do use them, because it's very worthwhile, I do believe. So again, thanks, Dominic, and hopefully we can meet face to face rather than on these ghastly electronic systems. And thank you very much for your time, and I know it's going to be greatly appreciated.
No problem. Are you in Harrogate, Godfrey?
No, I'm in East Riding. I'm over near Howden, just sort of southeast of York.
Okay, so I'm coming to Huddersfield in about 3 weeks' time. That's probably a bit far from you, but I'll be in Leeds next year. If you fancy coming to watch a show in Leeds, come and watch a show in Leeds.
I will do. Leeds is easy, or certainly easier. We've got a small holding, and really a little bit middle of nowhere. With a few chickens and a few bits and pieces, you know.
Look out for. Do you know somebody called Claire Frisby?
Yes, she used to work for the BBC.
She did, and she lives in East Riding. She still does work for the BBC, and she's my cousin.
Really?
Yeah,
Oh,
and she lives in East Riding. Yeah, you must look each other up.
Do you know, I haven't seen her since a Village Fete. She was at our Village Fete. I think she opened it or something. That must be certainly 10 years ago, probably 15 years ago. Very nice lady. We got on like a house on fire. And I don't often get on with anybody from the BBC.
No, she suppresses. Her views are changing as she's grown older, and but she keeps them to herself. And she's a great presenter. And I think in another life, if the cards had been dealt slightly differently, she'd be one of the faces of BBC News across the country. But just at the right time in her career, the dice didn't quite roll for her. But she's absolutely great, and yeah, she's a neighbour of yours, so look her up.
If you speak to her, give her my very best wishes, won't you?
I will do just that.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Dominic.
Cheers, Godfrey.
Toodaloo. As most of you know, my work is very heavily independently research-based. And I get my information from all over the world. It would help if you press the subscribe button and the little bell next to it, because the more subscribers I have, the more likely it is that international independent research institutes will share their material with me. It's most helpful, and then of course I automatically share it with you. So surprise, won't cost you anything. Thank you very much.